When I walked into my daughter's living room on Christmas morning, still in my silk pajamas and carrying a tray of homemade cinnamon rolls, my son-in-law Jake looked at me and said, "Oh, Margaret, we didn't get you anything. People your age don't really need Christmas presents." The cinnamon rolls slipped from my hands, landing with a crash that nobody seemed to notice. The words hit me like shards of ice, piercing through my chest and freezing me in place. People your age. I stood there, watching as everyone exchanged uncomfortable glances before quickly looking away. People your age don't need presents. The room suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. I had spent weeks selecting the perfect gifts for everyone. For Jake, an expensive leather wallet that cost $278.50. For my daughter Melissa, the silver bracelet she'd been eyeing for months, $325 plus tax. For my grandchildren, carefully chosen toys and books totaling over $400. I had wrapped each one with shimmering paper and satin ribbons, had written heartfelt notes on each tag, and now here I was, the only one without a gift, because apparently at 56, I was simply too old to deserve one. "Mom, don't make that face," Melissa said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she approached me. "Jake didn't mean anything by it. It's just that at your age, what do you really need, you know? We figured you'd prefer if we spent the money on the kids." Her hand patted my arm in what I suppose she thought was a comforting gesture, but it felt like pity. I could feel my face burning with humiliation as I forced a smile. My throat tightened as I bent down to pick up the ruined cinnamon rolls. The sticky sweetness now smeared across the hardwood floor that I had helped them pay for when they bought this house. $15,000 from my retirement savings as their down payment gift. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. Of course the children should have presents. I could taste the bitterness in my mouth as I spoke. Could feel the rapid beating of my heart against my ribs. I retreated to the kitchen, the cold tile against my slippered feet grounding me as I grabbed paper towels to clean up the mess. Behind me, I could hear the excited shrieks of my grandchildren as they tore into their presents I had spent hours wrapping with trembling, arthritic fingers that Jake had once commented made me look like an old witch at a family dinner 3 months ago. I scrubbed at the sticky mess on the floor, my knees protesting as I knelt there, invisible to my family in the next room. As I worked, I calculated in my head, 34 years I had been buying Christmas presents for Melissa. 34 years of carefully chosen gifts, of budgeting and saving to make holidays special. When she was little, I had worked 2 jobs. My regular position as an administrative assistant paying $32,500 annually, plus weekend shifts at a local department store for an additional $7,800 a year just to afford the dollhouse she desperately wanted one year. It had cost $289.99, nearly an entire month's rent at the time. That evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the one bedroom I'd downsized to after helping Melissa and Jake with their down payment, I stared at the small artificial tree I'd set up by the window. Beneath it were the gifts they had given me in previous years, a generic bath set from 2 Christmases ago that I'd never opened, a scarf in a color I never wore from the year before that, and a digital picture frame from 3 years ago that no one had bothered to help me set up. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd received a gift that showed any real thought or consideration for who I was as a person rather than just grandma or mom or a woman of a certain age. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Diana. How was Christmas with the family? Diana was 59, 3 years older than me, and the only person who seemed to understand what it felt like to suddenly become invisible after turning 50. We had met at a community center watercolor class 6 months ago, bonding over our shared experiences of being treated as if we were ancient relics, rather than vibrant women with decades of life still ahead of us. I didn't respond right away. The shame was too fresh, too raw. Instead, I pulled out the journal I'd started keeping at Diana's suggestion. Document everything. She had told me over coffee at the local diner, where we met every Thursday morning. The little comments, the dismissals, the way they look through you, instead of at you. One day, you'll read it back and realize it's not you who should be ashamed, it's them. With a heavy sigh, I began to write. my pen scratching against the paper as I recorded every detail of the day, the exact words spoken, the expressions on their faces, the physical sensations of humiliation and hurt. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the sky outside turned from evening purple to pitch black, until tears blurred my vision so badly I could no longer see the page. 3 days passed before I felt ready to face anyone again. I had ignored calls from Melissa, who had left a voicemail saying, "Mom, you're being too sensitive about this whole present thing. It's not a big deal. Call me back." Her words only deepened the ache in my chest. Too sensitive. The dismissal that had followed me my entire life. Too sensitive when my ex-husband criticized my appearance after I gained weight following Melissa's birth. Too sensitive when my boss passed me over for promotion 5 years ago, giving it instead to a colleague 15 years my junior because she had the right energy for the direction of the company. Too sensitive when the salesperson at the makeup counter suggested I switch to age-appropriate products, steering me away from the vibrant colors toward muted, flattering shades that would help me age gracefully. On the 4th day after Christmas, December 29th at 10:15 a.m., I met Diana at our usual spot, Rosie's Diner on Main Street, where the coffee cost $2.75 and refills were free. Diana was already there, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a stylish bun, her lips painted a defiant red that made me conscious of my own bare face. I hadn't bothered with makeup since Christmas. What was the point, when I was apparently past the age of being seen? "You look like hell," Diana said bluntly, as I slid into the booth across from her. The vinyl seat was cracked and worn, much like I felt. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about the cinnamon rolls hitting the floor, about Jake's casual cruelty, about Melissa's dismissal of my feelings. I told her how I'd helped them buy their house, how I'd downsized my own life to make theirs more comfortable. I told her about the gifts piled beneath my sad little tree, thoughtless tokens that proved they didn't really see me at all. "And you know what the worst part is?" I said, my voice dropping to a whisper as I leaned across the scratched Formica table. "I've spent $43,897 on Christmas gifts for them over the years. I kept every receipt, added it up last night, nearly $44,000. And they couldn't even bother to wrap up a scented candle for me this year." Diana's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Margaret, this isn't just about Christmas presents. This is about respect, about being valued, about being seen as a whole person worthy of consideration and care. Not just an aging woman who can provide free babysitting and financial help when needed." I felt something shift inside me as she spoke. Not the hot flash of humiliation that had become so familiar, but something cooler, more focused. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. "You're right," I said slowly. "This isn't just about Christmas." "No, it's not," Diana agreed, signaling the waitress for more coffee. "And you're not alone. Remember Carol from our watercolor class? Last week her son told her she was too old to understand how to use the new phone he got her, so he didn't bother to help her set it up. And Jean from my book club, her daughter suggested she might want to consider moving into a community for seniors, because her house is too much for someone her age to maintain. Meanwhile, Jean runs 5 miles every morning and tends a vegetable garden that feeds half the neighborhood. As Diana spoke, I felt a slow-burning anger replace the icy shame that had paralyzed me since Christmas morning. I thought about all the ways I had been gradually erased: the birthday cards with jokes about aging, the invitations that stopped coming because parties were for young people, the way salespeople addressed my daughter instead of me when we shopped together, as if my money was somehow less valid than hers. "So what do I do?" I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm coffee mug, drawing strength from its solidity. "Just accept that this is how it's going to be from now on. That once you hit a certain age, you become less deserving of consideration and respect." Diana's smile was slow and slightly wicked. "Oh hell no, you fight back. Not with anger, that just confirms their belief that we're bitter old women. You fight back by reclaiming your value, by refusing to be invisible, by documenting everything and then using it to educate them or, if they won't listen, to free yourself from their narrow perception of who you are and what you deserve. That evening, as I sat at my small desk by the window, I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Inventory of Dismissal. I began with Christmas Day, recording every detail in clinical precision: date, time, exact words spoken, context, my emotional and physical response. Then I went back further, documenting every instance I could remember of being made to feel less than because of my age. The list grew longer than I had expected, spanning years rather than months. There was a pattern I hadn't noticed before, a gradual erosion of respect that had begun even before I'd turned 50. January 3rd brought a new year, and with it, my resolution to stop accepting the invisibility that had been thrust upon me. I started small, scheduling an appointment at an upscale salon I'd always considered too expensive. I spent $287 on a new haircut and color, not the subtle, muted tones the stylist first suggested to cover the gray gracefully, but bright copper highlights that caught the light and drew the eye. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I saw a woman who refused to fade into the background. The following week, I used some of the money I'd set aside for next Christmas, $1,250 that would now be spent on myself, instead, and booked a session with a personal stylist. Together, we purged my closet of the shapeless, age-appropriate clothes I'd gradually adopted and replaced them with pieces that actually fit my body and expressed my personality. Color isn't just for the young, the stylist told me as she handed me a vibrant blue blouse that made my eyes look electric. Neither is style or sexuality or joy. On January 17th, exactly 3 weeks after the Christmas incident, I invited Melissa to lunch at an elegant restaurant downtown where entrees started at $32. I arrived early, securing a table by the window where the natural light was flattering and the view of the city provided a subtle reminder that there was a whole world beyond the narrow confines of how others perceived me. When Melissa arrived, 15 minutes late as usual, she did a double take at my appearance. "Mom, wow, you look, different. Did you do something with your hair?" "I did," I said, not elaborating further. I watched as she took in the changes, not just my hair, but the tailored blazer in teal blue, the delicate gold necklace at my throat, the subtle but skillful makeup that enhanced rather than masked my features. I saw confusion in her eyes, followed by something that might have been admiration mixed with unease. Throughout lunch, I steered the conversation away from grandchildren and household matters, the topics Melissa usually relegated me to, and instead discussed the photography class I'd enrolled in, the exhibit at the Modern Art Museum I'd visited, the political podcast I'd become engrossed in. Each time she tried to bring the conversation back to domestic territory, I gently but firmly redirected it. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" she finally asked as our plates were cleared. "You seem, I don't know, different somehow." I took a sip of my water, gathering my thoughts before responding. "I'm feeling more myself than I have in a long time," I said carefully. "But there is something I wanted to discuss with you. About Christmas." Her expression immediately shifted to defensive. "Mom, not this again. I told you, it wasn't a big deal. Jake didn't mean anything by it." "That's exactly the problem," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "The fact that neither of you thought it was a big deal to exclude me from a family gift exchange, to explicitly state that people my age don't need presents, that speaks volumes about how you see me. Not as a complete person with feelings and desires and interests, but as a category, a grandmother, an aging woman, someone whose worth is diminished simply because of the number of years I've lived." Melissa's face flushed, her eyes darting around the restaurant as if checking whether anyone could overhear us. "That's not fair. You're twisting things. Jake was just trying to what?" I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. "To save money. I've calculated that I've spent $43,897 on Christmas gifts for you and your family over the years. I've contributed $15,000 to your house down payment. I babysit the children 12 hours each week, saving you approximately $14,400 annually in childcare costs. If this were about money, I would be the last person excluded from gift giving. Her mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. The realization that she'd never considered the financial value I brought to their lives, let alone the emotional and practical support I provided. This isn't about money, I continued. This is about respect. About whether you see me as someone worthy of the same consideration you give everyone else in the family. And based on Christmas Day, the answer seems to be no. Mom, that's not. Let me finish, I said, raising a hand. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty or to demand anything from you. I'm telling you because I respect you enough to be honest about how your actions affected me. And because going forward, things need to change. As I drove home from lunch, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The conversation had not gone as I'd hoped. Melissa had become defensive, then tearful, accusing me of keeping score and making Christmas transactional. She'd missed the point entirely, or perhaps chosen to miss it, because acknowledging it would require her to confront her own complicity in pushing me to the margins. That evening, Diana called to ask how the lunch had gone. When I described Melissa's reaction, she sighed heavily. I'm not surprised. People don't like having their biases pointed out, especially when those biases benefit them. But you planted a seed. Now you need to give it time to grow, or decide whether this relationship is fertile ground at all. The following Tuesday, January 21st, brought unexpected news. An email from a photography contest I'd entered on a whim. My submission. A stark black and white image of an elderly woman's hands intertwined with a child's, had one honorable mention. The prize was modest, $350 and publication in a local arts magazine, but the validation was priceless. Someone had seen value in my perspective, in my eye, in my contribution. I printed the congratulatory email and added it to a new folder I'd labeled Visible. February arrived with bitter cold and a text message from Melissa. Can you watch the kids this weekend? Jake and I need a break. No acknowledgement of our lunch conversation. No mention of Christmas. Just the assumption that I would be available when needed. In the past, I would have immediately agreed, rearranging my own plans to accommodate them. This time, I took a deep breath and typed, I'm sorry, but I have plans this weekend. I'm attending a photography workshop in Burlington. Then I actually booked the workshop, $425 for 2 days of instruction, that I would have talked myself out of before. The response came quickly. Since when are you into photography? Can't you reschedule? We really need this, Mom. I felt the familiar pull of guilt, the ingrained response to put my own needs last. But then I remembered Christmas morning, the sound of the cinnamon rolls hitting the floor, the cold dismissal in Jake's voice. People your age don't really need Christmas presents. I typed back, my photography class has been meeting for 3 months now. I mentioned it at lunch. The workshop can't be rescheduled. Perhaps, ask Jake's parents. Then I put my phone on silent and went to prepare for my evening book club meeting. When I returned home 3 hours later, there were 5 missed calls from Melissa and a string of increasingly frustrated text messages. The final one read, fine, I guess we'll have to pay for a sitter. Thanks for nothing. I felt a twinge of hurt at her words, but beneath it was something stronger, a sense of righteous clarity. I was not nothing. My time was not worthless. My interests were not irrelevant. For too long, I had allowed myself to be defined solely by what I could provide to others, childcare, financial support, emotional labor, rather than being valued for who I was as a complete human being. The photography workshop in Burlington proved to be a turning point. Surrounded by people of various ages who shared my interest, I felt myself expanding beyond the narrow roles that had confined me. The instructor, a woman in her 60s with a shock of white hair and penetrating blue eyes, took a particular interest in my work. You have an eye for the invisible, she told me as she examined my portfolio, for capturing the beauty in what others overlook. On the second day of the workshop, during lunch break, I found myself sitting with a small group of women ranging in age from their 40s to their 70s. As we shared stories over sandwiches and coffee, I hesitantly mentioned the Christmas incident. Oh honey, that's just the beginning. said Elaine, a 72-year-old former business executive with a silver pixie cut and enough energy to power a small city. Wait until you're my age. My daughter-in-law actually suggested I wear age-appropriate clothes to my grandson's graduation. Apparently, a knee-length dress with a colorful scarf was too attention-seeking for a woman of my years. My boss started giving all the client presentations to my younger colleagues, added Rebecca, 47, her dark hair streaked with premature gray she refused to cover. When I asked why, he said clients respond better to fresh faces. I'd brought in 3 of our biggest accounts that year. One by one, the women shared their stories of being erased, dismissed, set aside. But they also shared strategies for pushing back, for reclaiming space and demanding respect. As I listened, I felt the weight of isolation lifting. I wasn't alone in this experience, wasn't imagining the subtle and not so subtle ways I'd been marginalized. And more importantly, I wasn't powerless to change it. That evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and navigated to a website. Diana had mentioned a forum for women over 50 who were fighting back against ageism in their personal and professional lives. I created an account, choosing the username visible at 56, and began to read. The stories poured over me like a cleansing rain, women describing situations so similar to mine it was uncanny, but also sharing their triumphs, their strategies, their refusal to be diminished. As February turned to March, I felt myself growing stronger, more centered in my own worth. I continued documenting instances of ageism, not just from my family, but from store clerks who addressed questions to younger shoppers standing near me, from medical professionals who dismissed my concerns as just part of getting older, from advertisements that suggested my only value now was in looking younger than my age. But I also documented my resistance, the times I spoke up, redirected conversations, refused to accept diminished expectations. On March 15th, exactly 80 days after Christmas, Melissa called with news that made my stomach drop. "Mom, we're hosting Easter this year. The whole family will be there. Jake's parents, his sister and her husband, everyone. I was hoping you could help with the cooking and maybe come early to hide eggs for the kids." I took a deep breath, carefully considering my response. I did not want another holiday disaster, but I also refused to set myself up for further humiliation. "I'd be happy to attend Easter dinner," I said finally. "But I won't be coming early to help or to hide eggs. I'll bring a dish to share, like any other guest." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Melissa spoke, her voice tight with confusion and irritation. "Since when do you consider yourself just a guest in my home? You're my mother." "Yes, I am," I agreed. "And as your mother, I deserve the same respect and consideration as any other adult at your gathering. After what happened at Christmas, I need to set some boundaries." "Mom, are you still hung up on that?" "It was months ago." Jake apologized. "He hadn't, actually, but I let that slide." "I'm not hung up on anything," I said calmly. "I'm making choices about how I want to be treated going forward. I'll be there for Easter dinner at 2 p.m. with a nice salad and dessert. I look forward to seeing everyone." I ended the call before she could protest further. Then immediately texted Diana. "Just set my first real boundary with Melissa about Easter. Feel like I might throw up, but also strangely powerful." Her response came back immediately. "The nausea passes. The power grows. So proud of you. Want to go shopping for a knockout Easter outfit that will make Jake's eyeballs fall out of his head?" The week before Easter, I had another lunch with Melissa, this time at a casual cafe near her office. I could tell she'd been discussing me with others. Her questions about my new attitude and phase had the distinct flavor of rehearsed concern. I let her talk, noting how she carefully avoided any mention of Christmas or my refusal to help with Easter preparations. Finally, when she paused for breath, I said, "Melissa, I want you to know that I love you very much. That hasn't changed and won't change. What has changed is my willingness to be treated as less valuable because of my age. I've spent 56 years on this planet, 34 of them as your mother. That experience deserves respect, not dismissal." "Mom, Nobody is dismissing you, she protested, but her eyes slid away from mine as she spoke. When Jake said people my age don't need Christmas presents, and you defended him instead of me, that was dismissal, I said quietly. When you ask me to provide free childcare but show no interest in my photography or book club or the other aspects of my life that don't directly benefit you, that's dismissal. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I am aware of it, and I'm making different choices now. What kind of choices? She asked, wariness creeping into her voice. I'm choosing to spend time with people who see me fully, not just as a convenience or a category. I'm choosing to invest in my own interests and growth. I'm choosing to expect the same consideration from others that I give to them. I reached across the table and took her hand, and I'm choosing to believe that our relationship can evolve into something more balanced and respectful. If we're both willing to do the work. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to her. Then she said, I just don't understand why you're being so difficult lately. Ever since Christmas, it's like you're a different person. I withdrew my hand gently. I'm not a different person. I'm just no longer accepting treatment that diminishes me. It might feel difficult to you because it requires adjustment, but it's actually quite simple. Treat me with the same respect you'd give any other adult in your life. The conversation circled from there, never quite reaching resolution. As I drove home afterward, I felt a familiar heaviness settling in my chest. Changing myself was challenging enough. Trying to change how others perceived and treated me sometimes felt impossible. But then I remembered Elaine from the photography workshop. With her bright scarves and unapologetic energy at 72. If she could do it, so could I. Easter Sunday arrived with sunshine and mild temperatures, a perfect spring day. I dressed carefully in the outfit Diana and I had selected, a fitted dress in a soft lavender that complemented my newly highlighted hair, comfortable but stylish heels, and a statement necklace made by an artist I'd met through my photography connections. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who occupied her space confidently, whose eyes were bright with purpose and self-possession. I arrived at Melissa and Jake's house precisely at 2 p.m., carrying a salad of spring greens, strawberries, and goat cheese, plus a coconut cake from an upscale bakery that had cost $68.50. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed Jake's parents unloading dishes from their car. His mother, Barbara, was 5 years younger than me, but dressed and styled herself to appear at least a decade older, as if surrendering to age rather than embracing it. Margaret, she called, her voice carrying that false brightness people often used with the elderly or infirm. Don't you look colorful today? Isn't that dress a bit young for you? And there it was, the casual diminishment. The implication that certain colors or styles were off limits to me, based solely on my age. In the past, I would have felt embarrassed, might have even apologized for daring to wear something vibrant. Today, I smiled and replied, thank you, Barbara. I feel wonderful in this color. And age has nothing to do with whether a person can wear lavender. It's just a matter of finding the right shade for your skin tone. Her smile faltered slightly. But before she could respond, Jake's father approached, taking the salad container from my hands without asking. Let me help you with that. Wouldn't want you to strain yourself. I'm perfectly capable of carrying a salad. George, I said pleasantly, maintaining my grip on the container. But thank you for your concern. The surprise in his eyes would have been comical if it weren't so telling. How long had I been allowing people to treat me as fragile and diminished? How much had I internalized their perception until I began to see myself through their limiting lens? Inside, the house was chaotic with children running about. Adults clustered in conversation groups, the air filled with the scents of ham and roasted vegetables. Melissa was in the kitchen, her face flushed from the heat and stress of hosting. She barely glanced at me as I set down my contributions. You can put your purse in the guest room, she said, gesturing vaguely down the hall. We're eating in about 30 minutes. I made my way through the crowded living room, nodding hello to Jake's sister and her husband, who were engaged in conversation with another couple I didn't recognize. No one stopped to include me or introduce me to the strangers. I continued to the guest room, where I took a moment to center myself, remembering Diana's advice. You don't need their validation to know your worth. Stand in your power, even if, especially if, they try to shrink you. When I returned to the main area, I deliberately chose a seat in the center of the action, rather than the peripheral chair near the kitchen that had become my usual spot at family gatherings. Jake did a double take when he saw me there, his expression flickering between confusion and annoyance. Margaret, wouldn't you be more comfortable in the armchair? It's softer on the back. I'm quite comfortable here. Thank you, I replied with a smile. My back is in excellent shape from the yoga classes I've been taking. This was a small exaggeration. I'd only been to 3 classes so far, but the point was made. I was not old, not fragile, not in need of special accommodation. Throughout the meal, I noticed how often the conversation flowed around rather than to me, how questions about my life were superficial or absent entirely. But instead of withdrawing into hurt silence as I might have before, I deliberately engaged, offering opinions on current events, sharing anecdotes from my photography class, asking thoughtful questions of others at the table. Some responded with surprise and interest. Others, particularly Jake, with barely concealed impatience, as if I were a child, interrupting the adults. After dessert had been served, and exclaimed over my coconut cake, drawing genuine appreciation, Jake's mother pulled out a bag of Easter gifts for the children. As she distributed brightly colored packages to my grandchildren, and Jake's niece and nephew, I felt a pang of memory from Christmas morning. But this time, I was prepared. I had brought small gifts as well, beautifully wrapped books I'd selected specifically for each child's interests. I have some Easter treats too, I announced, retrieving the package from beside my chair. As I handed them out, I noticed Jake exchanging glances with Melissa. I could read their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken. Why is she doing this? She's competing with Mom. She's still upset about Christmas. Let them think what they wanted. I knew that my gifts were expressions of love and thoughtfulness, not attempts to score points or create conflict. The children's delight as they unwrapped the books was all the validation I needed. As the gathering began to wind down, Jake's father cornered me in the kitchen, where I was helping to load the dishwasher, despite Melissa's insistence that I should rest. Margaret, he said in a low voice, Barbara mentioned you seemed a bit different today. Everything okay with you? No health issues we should know about? The implication was clear. My refusal to conform to their expectations of how a woman my age should behave must indicate some kind of problem, mental or physical. I straightened up from the dishwasher, meeting his gaze directly. I'm in excellent health, George, thank you for asking. Better than I've been in years, actually. It's amazing how energizing it is to pursue your passions and surround yourself with people who value your whole self. He blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting such a direct response. Well, that's good to hear. It's just that Barbara thought you seemed, well, not quite yourself, actually. I'm more myself than I've been in a long time, I replied, keeping my tone light but firm. Perhaps Barbara is just used to a version of me that was more accommodating. The drive home from Easter dinner was quiet, my mind replaying the subtle and not so subtle ways my family had tried to put me back in the box they'd created for me. The concerned glances when I expressed opinions, the surprise when I mentioned my photography being featured in a local exhibition, the automatic assumption that I wouldn't want to join the younger adults for after-dinner games. Each instance was small on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore now that I'd learned to see it. The following Thursday at 10:15 a.m., I met Diana at our usual spot in Rosie's Diner. The coffee had gone up to $2.95, but the refills were still free. Diana listened intently as I recounted the Easter gathering, her eyes sharp with understanding. So no major blow-ups, but no real breakthrough either, she summarized when I finished. That tracks. People don't change their perception overnight, especially when the old way benefits them. But you held your ground, and that's what matters. You're creating a new pattern. It's exhausting, I admitted, running a finger around the rim of my coffee mug. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth all this effort. Wouldn't it be easier to just go along? Accept the role they've assigned me. Diana's expression hardened. Easier for whom? For them. Certainly. But for you, living a diminished version of yourself, being valued only for what you can provide rather than who you are, that's a slow death, Margaret. And you've already wasted too many years in that box. She was right, of course. The past 3 months of standing in my power, despite the resistance and discomfort it sometimes created, had brought me more joy and self-respect than the previous 5 years of acquiescence. I thought about the new friends I'd made through my photography and book clubs, about the art I was creating, about the online forum where women shared their experiences of pushing back against ageism. I was building a life that reflected my worth, not others' limitations. You're right, I said, straightening my shoulders. No, going back. April brought a series of small victories. My photograph was displayed in a local gallery as part of a community exhibition. I was invited to join the board of the arts organization that ran my photography class. I began volunteering at a shelter for women escaping domestic violence, offering both practical support and the perspective that came from rebuilding my own sense of worth after years of subtle erosion. It also brought increasing tension with Melissa and Jake. My refusal to babysit on demand created practical problems for them, forcing them to pay for childcare or adjust their schedules. My new interests and friendships meant I wasn't always available when they called. My growing confidence made it harder for them to dismiss or talk over me. On April 23rd, things came to a head. Melissa called, her voice tight with frustration. "Mom, we need to talk about what's going on with you. Jake and I are worried. You're not acting like yourself, and frankly, the kids are confused by your behavior too." "What behavior specifically concerns you?" I asked calmly, though my heart had begun to race. This was the confrontation I'd been both expecting and dreading. This whole rebellion thing. The way you dress now, the photography obsession, the attitude when we ask for help with the kids. It's like you don't care about family anymore. Like you've gotten, selfish in your old age. There it was, the accusation I'd feared. That by refusing to exist solely for others' convenience, by claiming space and interests of my own, I was being selfish. That by expecting reciprocity and respect, I was failing as a mother and grandmother. "Melissa," I said carefully, "would you describe a 56-year-old man as being in his old age?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "What? No, of course not. That's middle-aged for a man. But for a woman, it's old age." "Mom, you're twisting my words again. That's not what I meant." "What did you mean then?" She sighed heavily. "I meant that you're acting like a teenager going through some kind of rebellious phase, which is ridiculous at your ... At this point in your life, I see," I said, keeping my voice steady. "So pursuing my own interests, having boundaries around my time, and expecting to be treated with respect, is rebellious and ridiculous for someone my age. That's an interesting perspective. That's not what I'm saying." Melissa's frustration was palpable even through the phone. "I'm saying that family should come first, and lately it seems like we're at the bottom of your priority list. Family absolutely should come first." I agreed, but family is not one-directional. It's not me always being available to you while you ignore or dismiss what's important to me. It's mutual respect and support. It's acknowledging that I am a complete person with my own life and interests. Not just grandma, or mom, or free childcare. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Melissa said, "Jake thinks you might be going through some kind of midlife crisis, or maybe early signs of, cognitive issues." The suggestion that my awakening to my own worth must be a sign of mental decline was so offensive I nearly hung up. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I'm going to pretend you didn't just suggest that standing up for myself is a sign of dementia. That's beneath you, Melissa, and it's a common tactic used to dismiss older women who refuse to be convenient and compliant." I expected better from my daughter. "Mom, I didn't mean I think you did," I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. "And that's the problem. You and Jake have become so accustomed to seeing me as a category rather than a person that when I act like a full human being with agency and boundaries, you assume something must be wrong with me. That's ageism, Melissa, and it's hurtful coming from my own daughter. The conversation ended with Melissa in tears and me feeling both drained and strangely liberated. I had named the problem directly ageism, and refused to accept the framing that my self-respect was a pathology. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was an important step in the ongoing process of reclaiming my dignity. That evening, I posted about the conversation in the online forum, seeking perspective and support from women who'd faced similar challenges with family members. The responses poured in, stories of adult children who couldn't adjust to seeing their mothers as autonomous beings, suggestions for navigating these difficult conversations, affirmations that I was not wrong to expect respect and reciprocity. One comment in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Judith, 68, who had gone through a similar awakening after her husband's death 5 years earlier. What you're experiencing is the natural resistance that comes when you change the rules of engagement. For years, you've been playing a role in your family system, the accommodating mother, the convenient grandmother, the woman who exists to serve others' needs. Now you're changing that role, and it's disrupting the entire system. They're pushing back not because you're wrong, but because your transformation forces them to change too. Hold firm. The ones who truly love you will adjust. The ones who only loved what you provided may fall away. Both outcomes are ultimately for the best. May arrived with warming temperatures and a growing sense of purpose. I had begun documenting my journey not just in my private journal, but in a blog called Visible at Any Age. I wrote about the Christmas without presents, about Easter and lavender, about the ongoing conversations with Melissa and the shifting dynamics in my family. I wrote about the small daily indignities faced by women over 50, the medical concerns, dismissed as just aging, the fashion options that assumed we wanted to disappear, the dating profiles that went unanswered while men our age pursued women decades younger. To my surprise, the blog began to gain readers, first dozens, then hundreds. Women from across the country and beyond shared their own stories in the comments, creating a virtual community of support and resistance. Some were in their 70s and 80s, others as young as their 40s, already feeling the first subtle effects of becoming less valuable in a society that prized youth, especially in women. On May 12th, I received an email that made my heart race. The editor of a national online magazine focused on women's issues had found my blog and wanted to feature my story in a special issue on ageism. The piece would be titled, "No Christmas Present for Grandma, One Woman's Awakening to Everyday Ageism," and would pay $750. It would be published on June 15th, exactly 1 month before my 57th birthday. I said yes immediately. Then spent the next week working with the editor to shape my story into a powerful narrative that maintained the personal details while connecting them to the broader social issue of how aging women are perceived and treated. The final piece included not just my experiences but practical advice for others facing similar situations, as well as statistics about the economic and social impacts of ageism against women. When the article was finalized but not yet published, I faced a difficult decision, whether to tell Melissa and Jake about it beforehand. They would be recognizable to anyone who knew us, though I had changed names and some identifying details. After much consideration and consultation with Diana and my online community, I decided that giving them advance notice was the respectful thing to do, even if it created conflict. I invited Melissa to meet me at a quiet cafe on May 25th. I arrived early, securing a corner table that would allow for privacy. When she arrived, I could see wariness in her expression. Our relationship had been strained since the phone confrontation in April. Our interactions limited to brief, surface-level conversations about the children. "Thank you for coming," I said as she sat down across from me. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." I explained about the blog, the growing readership, and now the article. As I spoke, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. "Let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "You've been writing about our family, about Christmas, about me and Jake on the internet, for strangers to read, and now it's going to be in some magazine." "I've been writing about my experiences with ageism," I clarified. "Our Christmas incident was the catalyst, yes, but it's about a much broader issue that affects millions of women. I can't believe you would do this, Melissa said, her voice rising slightly. Air our private family matters in public. Make Jake and me look like villains. The article doesn't portray anyone as a villain, I said calmly. It describes behaviors and attitudes that are common in our society, so common that most people don't even notice them. That's the point. Ageism is often unconscious, but that doesn't make it any less harmful. So you're saying we're unconsciously ageist? Her tone was defensive, challenging. I'm saying that what happened at Christmas, telling me people my age don't need presents, excluding me from a family tradition, was an example of ageism. Yes, whether it was conscious or not isn't really the point. The impact was the same either way. Melissa shook her head, her expression hardening. And you never thought to discuss this with us privately? To give us a chance to understand or make amends before blasting us to the world? I did try to discuss it with you, I reminded her gently. At lunch after Christmas. Several times since then. Each time, you dismissed my concerns or suggested there was something wrong with me for feeling hurt. She had no immediate response to that, her eyes dropping to the table between us. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but still tense. I need to tell Jake about this. He's going to be furious. I understand, I said. And I'm sorry this is difficult, but I'm not sorry for speaking my truth or for connecting with others who've had similar experiences. This isn't about shaming you or Jake, it's about bringing awareness to something that affects many women as they age. Melissa leapt shortly after, her coffee barely touched. I sat alone at the table for a long while, watching the afternoon light shift through the cafe windows, feeling both heavy with the weight of family tension and lightened by the release of finally standing fully in my truth. That evening, my phone rang at 8:43 p.m. It was Jake, his voice tight with controlled anger. Margaret, Melissa told me about this article you're publishing. I think you owe us an apology and a promise to retract it. Hello, Jake, I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the adrenaline now coursing through me. I understand you're upset, but I won't be retracting the article. It's an important story that needs to be told. It's a distorted version of events designed to make us look bad, he countered. One comment about Christmas presents, taken completely out of context, and suddenly we're poster children for elder abuse or something. I took a deep breath before responding. The article isn't just about Christmas, Jake. It's about a pattern of behavior and attitudes that diminishes older women. And it's not accusatory, it's educational. The point isn't to vilify you or Melissa, but to highlight how pervasive these attitudes are. How they show up even in loving families. I don't care what your point is, Jake snapped. The fact is, you're exposing private family matters to strangers. How do you think that makes us look? How do you think that affects Melissa, who's already stressed enough with work and the kids? I'm sorry this is causing additional stress, I said sincerely. But I need to ask, why are you more concerned about how this makes you look than about how your actions made me feel? Why is Melissa's stress more important than the hurt I experienced? The silence that followed was telling. Finally, Jake said, this isn't about you versus Melissa. This is about loyalty and privacy. No, I corrected him gently. This is about visibility and respect. For 5 years, I've been gradually erased within my own family, valued for what I provide rather than who I am. Christmas was simply the moment when it became impossible to ignore any longer. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes, with Jake alternating between demands that I cancel the article and attempts to minimize the significance of what had happened at Christmas. I remained calm but firm, neither apologizing for speaking my truth nor escalating the conflict with accusations or raised voice. When we finally ended the call, I felt drained but resolved. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I decided to stop accepting the diminished role I'd been assigned. The discomfort it created for me and for my family was part of the necessary process of change. June 15th arrived, and with it the publication of my article. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded the magazine's website and my own blog. Emails poured in from women across the country and beyond. sharing their own stories of invisibility and erasure, of being devalued and dismissed as they aged. There were television and radio requests for interviews, invitations to speak at women's groups and senior centers. In the midst of this unexpected spotlight, Melissa and Jake maintained a chilly distance. They didn't explicitly forbid me from seeing my grandchildren, but invitations became scarce, and when I did visit, there was a palpable tension that even the children could sense. "Why is Daddy mad at you, Grandma?" my 7-year-old grandson asked during one such visit in late June. The question pierced my heart, reminding me that my stand for dignity had consequences beyond my own experience. "Your daddy and I have different ideas about some things right now," I explained carefully. "But that doesn't change how much I love you, or how much your mom and dad love you. Sometimes adults disagree, and that's okay." July 4th brought the annual neighborhood block party, an event I'd always attended with Melissa and her family in previous years. This time, no invitation was extended. I considered staying home, avoiding the awkwardness of navigating the party alone, but Diana wouldn't hear of it. "You live in this neighborhood too," she reminded me over the phone. "You have every right to be there, and I'll be your +1, so you won't have to face the lion's den alone." And so at 4:30 p.m. on Independence Day, a fitting holiday, I thought Riley, Diana, and I walked together to the community park where tables had been set up for the potluck dinner that preceded the fireworks. I wore a crisp white sundress with a red and blue scarf, my hair freshly styled, my posture intentionally straight and confident despite the anxiety churning in my stomach. We were placing our contributions on the food table, Diana's famous potato salad and my strawberry shortcake, when I spotted Melissa and Jake across the park, setting up lawn chairs near the playground where the children were running about. Melissa saw me at the same moment, her expression freezing before she quickly looked away, leaning to whisper something to Jake. "Well, that wasn't exactly subtle," Diana murmured beside me. "Want to go say hello, or let them stew in their own discomfort for a while?" I considered the question seriously. Part of me wanted to march right over, to force a confrontation or at least acknowledgement. Another part wanted to avoid them entirely, to focus on the other neighbors and friends who had been supportive of my journey. In the end, I chose a middle path. "Let's mingle," I decided. "If our paths cross naturally, I'll be civil and pleasant. But I won't chase after them or pretend everything is fine when it isn't." Throughout the afternoon and early evening, Diana and I moved through the gathering, stopping to chat with neighbors, accepting compliments on our potluck contributions, discussing everything from local politics to summer travel plans. I was aware of Melissa and Jake watching from a distance, their gazes following me when they thought I wouldn't notice. As twilight approached and the first fireworks were being set up, Barbara, Jake's mother, approached where Diana and I sat on a blanket spread on the grass. "Margaret," she said, her voice carrying that overly careful tone people often use when they're uncomfortable. "Could I speak with you for a moment? In private?" Diana raised an eyebrow at me in silent question. I nodded slightly to indicate I was okay, and she made a graceful excuse about refilling our drinks, leaving Barbara to take her place on the blanket beside me. "I read your article," Barbara said without preamble, once Diana was out of earshot. "The one about Christmas and all the rest of it." I felt a flutter of tension in my chest, but kept my expression neutral. "I see. And what did you think?" Barbara looked down at her hands, twisting the gold band she still wore, though her husband had passed away 3 years earlier. "I thought it was uncomfortable to read, but also very true." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time. "I'm 51, 5 years younger than you. But I've been experiencing exactly what you described. The invisibility, the dismissal, the sense of taking up too much space if I assert myself at all." This was not the conversation I had expected. "Really? I wouldn't have guessed you felt that way." She gave a small, sad laugh. "That's because I've gotten very good at making myself small, at accepting the role I'm supposed to play. The helpful mother-in-law, the doting grandmother, the woman who exists to serve others' needs. Reading your words was like seeing myself in a mirror I've been avoiding." I felt a rush of empathy for this woman I'd always perceived as judgmental and rigid. It's a difficult realization, I said softly, and even harder to act on. Yes, she agreed, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the gathering around us. That's why I wanted to talk to you. To ask, how did you find the courage to stand up, to speak out, to risk the relationships that matter to you? The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability and sincerity. I took a moment to consider my answer, watching as the first test fireworks streaked into the darkening sky. I don't know that it was courage, exactly, I said finally. It was more like, survival. I realized that continuing to accept erasure and dismissal was causing more damage to my spirit than standing up for myself might cause to my relationships. That if those relationships could only exist with me in a diminished role, they weren't truly honoring the love I thought was at their foundation. Barbara nodded slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Jake and Melissa are very angry with you, she said, changing direction slightly. They feel exposed and criticized. I know, I acknowledged. And I'm sorry for their pain, but not for speaking my truth. The article wasn't meant to shame them. It was meant to illuminate a pattern that affects so many women as they age. A pattern that you yourself recognize. I do, she admitted. And honestly, I admire what you've done, even though it's created such tension. You've started a conversation that needed to happen. She hesitated, then added, I've been thinking about taking an art class. I used to paint, before I got married, before the kids. I've been afraid it would seem selfish or frivolous at my age. It's never selfish to nurture your soul. I told her, warmth spreading through me at this unexpected connection. And 51 is far too young to decide you're done growing, or creating, or discovering new parts of yourself. We talked for nearly an hour as darkness fell completely and the fireworks display began in earnest. By the time Diana returned, having tactfully given us space for our conversation, Barbara and I had exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans to visit an art supply store together the following week. As Barbara walked away to rejoin her family, Diana settled beside me on the blanket. Well, that looked intense. Everything okay? I nodded, a smile spreading across my face as I watched the colorful explosions illuminating the night sky. Better than okay, actually. I think I just gained an unexpected ally, and possibly a friend. The next morning, as I was enjoying my coffee on the small balcony of my apartment, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something prompted me to answer rather than let it go to voicemail, as I usually did with unknown callers. Hello, is this Margaret Sullivan? A woman's voice asked. Yes, it is. Who's calling, please? My name is Elaine Broderick. I'm the program director for Women's Empowerment Now. We're a national nonprofit focused on advocacy and support for women facing discrimination and barriers in their personal and professional lives. I read your article, and I'd like to discuss a possible opportunity with you. By the end of the call, I had agreed to speak at their annual conference in September, a paid engagement that would put me in front of hundreds of women and allies working to combat various forms of discrimination, including ageism. The honorarium was $2,500 plus travel expenses, more money than I had ever been paid for a single day's work in my life. As July turned to August, my world continued to expand in ways I could never have imagined on that painful Christmas morning. My blog readership grew steadily. I was invited to contribute articles to several online publications focused on women's issues. The photography that had begun as a hobby led to a small but growing side business, taking portraits for women over 50 who wanted images that captured their vitality and complexity rather than trying to make them look younger. My relationship with Melissa remained strained, though there were small signs of thawing. She began sending more regular photos and updates about the children, occasionally asking my advice about parenting challenges. We had lunch once, at her initiative, where the conversation remained carefully neutral but not hostile. Jake, however, maintained his distance, still angry about what he perceived as a public betrayal. Barbara, surprisingly, became a regular presence in my life, We attended an art class together every Wednesday evening, gradually rebuilding her confidence in her creative abilities while deepening our unexpected friendship. Through her, I gained insight into Jake's perspective and background that helped me understand, if not excuse, some of his attitudes toward aging women. His father was very traditional, Barbara explained one evening, as we cleaned our brushes after class. He believed women should be decorative and useful, not assertive or independent. I tried to teach Jake differently, but some of those early lessons are hard to unlearn. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the approaching conference where I would be speaking. Diana helped me prepare, listening patiently as I practiced my presentation, offering feedback and encouragement when my confidence faltered. Remember, she told me the night before I was to fly out, you're not just speaking for yourself tomorrow. You're speaking for all of us, who've been told we should disappear after 50, who've been made to feel worthless or burdensome, for still wanting to be seen and heard. Your voice matters. The conference was held in a gleaming hotel in Chicago, a world away from my small apartment and the coffee shop where Diana and I had plotted my rebellion. Standing in the green room before my presentation, I felt a momentary panic. Who was I to address these accomplished women and men? What did I have to offer beyond my personal story of hurt and awakening? As if sensing my doubt, the conference organizer, a formidable woman in her 60s with close-cropped silver hair and a commanding presence, approached me. Nervous, she asked with a knowing smile. Terrified, I admitted, I'm not an expert or an academic. I'm just a woman who got fed up with being invisible. That's exactly why you're here, she said firmly. Expertise is valuable, but lived experience is powerful. These people can read statistics and studies anywhere. What they need from you is the truth of what it feels like to be erased, and the courage it takes to reclaim your space. That's what will inspire change. Her words steadied me, reminding me of the purpose behind my journey. This wasn't about me alone. It was about shifting perceptions and expectations for all women as they aged. About challenging the subtle and not so subtle ways society diminished our value with each passing year. When I walked onto the stage 30 minutes later, I carried that purpose with me. I looked out at the audience of nearly 300 people, mostly women of various ages, but some men as well, and began with the story that had started it all. When I walked into my daughter's living room on Christmas morning, still in my silk pajamas and carrying a tray of homemade cinnamon rolls, my son-in-law looked at me and said, "Oh, Margaret, we didn't get you anything. People your age don't really need Christmas presents." For the next 45 minutes, I shared my journey from that moment of humiliation to the stage where I now stood. I spoke about the small daily indignities that erode confidence and sense of self, about the economic impacts of ageism against women, the jobs not offered, the opportunities denied, the financial penalties we pay for daring to grow older, about the health consequences of internalizing society's message that we are less valuable with each passing year. But I also spoke about resistance and reclamation, about finding community with other women who refuse to disappear, about the power of documenting and naming the problem, about the joy that comes from standing fully in your worth, even when, especially when others try to diminish you. When I finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. As I made my way back to my seat, women stopped me, some with tears in their eyes, to share their own stories or simply to thank me for giving voice to experiences they had struggled to articulate. Business cards were pressed into my hand, invitations extended to speak at other events, connections offered that might help expand the reach of my message. That evening, as I sat alone in my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Melissa. My heart raced as I answered. "Hello. Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded tentative, almost shy. "I saw your speech today, online. They streamed it live. I hadn't known that. Hadn't considered that my words might reach beyond the conference hall to find my daughter." "Oh," I said, unsure how to respond. "I didn't realize it was really good," she said after a moment of silence. "You're a powerful speaker." "Thank you," I replied, still cautious. "I'm glad you watched it." Another silence, longer this time. Then Melissa spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm sorry I didn't listen when you tried to tell me how much it hurt. I'm sorry it took watching you tell hundreds of strangers for me to really hear you. The tears came then, flowing down my cheeks unchecked. Thank you for saying that, I managed. It means a lot to me. I've been thinking about it ever since the article came out. She continued. At first I was just angry and embarrassed. But then I started noticing things, the way people talk to women your age in stores. The cards in the birthday aisle that treat aging as a tragedy for women but a triumph for men. The way Dad used to dismiss Mom's opinions once she hit her 50s. I started seeing the pattern you were talking about. It's everywhere once you start looking for it. I agreed softly. Yeah, and I don't want to be part of it anymore. She took a deep breath that I could hear over the phone. Jake and I are still working through some things. He feels like you put us on blast publicly, without giving us a chance to make it right privately. I understand that perspective, I said carefully. And I wish things had unfolded differently. But I did try to address it privately first, multiple times. It wasn't until I shared my story more widely that it seemed to be taken seriously. I know, Melissa acknowledged. I see that now. And I'm trying to help Jake see it too. He's not there yet, but he's trying. For what it's worth, his mom has become your biggest fan. She talks about you constantly, about how you've inspired her to reclaim parts of herself she thought were gone forever. This made me smile through my tears. Barbara and I have become unexpected friends. Her art is really quite beautiful. She showed me some of her paintings last week. They're amazing. Another pause. Mom, when you get back from the conference, would you come over for dinner? Just you and me and the kids. I think we need to talk, really talk, about how we move forward. I'd like that very much, I said, hope blooming in my chest for the first time in months. After we hung up, I stood by the hotel window, looking out at the Chicago skyline illuminated against the night sky. 9 months had passed since that Christmas morning when a thoughtless comment had shattered my complacency and set me on this unexpected path. 9 months of growth and pain, of loss and discovery, of releasing old patterns and creating new ones. I thought about the woman I had been then, accommodating to the point of invisibility, accepting diminishment as the natural consequence of aging, believing on some level that I deserved less consideration simply because I had lived longer. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, visible, valued, standing firmly in her power and worth. The journey wasn't over. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments of resistance, more internal battles against decades of conditioning. But I had found my voice, and I was not alone. All around me were women refusing to disappear, creating communities of support and resistance, demanding to be seen in all their complex, vibrant humanity regardless of age. As I turned from the window and began preparing for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Diana. How did it go? Did you bring down the house? I smiled as I typed back. It was amazing. Standing ovation. Multiple speaking invitations. And Melissa called. She saw the live stream. We're having dinner when I get back. Diana's response came quickly. See? The universe rewards courage. I knew you had it in you from the moment you stood up to those Christmas present withholding jerks. Get some rest, rock star. This is just the beginning. She was right, I realized as I settled into bed. This wasn't an ending but a beginning, not just for me, but for every woman who refused to accept invisibility as the price of aging. There would be no more Christmas mornings without presents. No more accepting less than I deserved. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. At 56, soon to be 57, I was more visible, more powerful, and more authentically myself than I had ever been. And that was a gift worth fighting for, not just for me, but for every woman who would come after me, facing the same battles against erasure and diminishment. As I drifted toward sleep, I made a mental note to send Barbara information about the next conference. She had mentioned wanting to share her own story of awakening, of finding her voice and her art after years of silence. Together, we were creating a different narrative about aging as women, not a story of declining value and increasing invisibility, but one of deepening wisdom, growing courage, and uncompromising worth. People your age. The words that had once cut so deeply now felt almost like a badge of honor. People my age were powerful. People my age were reshaping narratives and expectations. People my age were refusing to disappear. And that was a present worth having.